Welcome to the YouTube channel Scary Stories, where we bring you the most chilling tales to send shivers down your spine. In this video, we present the legend of Boo, a terrifying story that has haunted generations of Halloween celebrants. The tale tells of a man named James, who receives a mysterious letter warning him of a terrible fate. Despite his disbelief, James soon learns that the forces of darkness are all too real and that his life hangs in the balance. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, and get ready for a tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This is the legend of Boo. Around Halloween, there are a huge number of legends that attract the attention of even adults. For the holiday, city dwellers dress up in creepy outfits, meet loved ones and tell mystical stories. One of the legends is called Boo. According to a frightening story, on the eve of All Saints' Day, a letter of death can be delivered to a person. If the recipient does not urgently redirect the message to another addressee, a terrible death awaits him. The unfortunate will begin to lose his mind and never return to his past life. The main character is a man named James. On an October morning, he goes out into the yard and finds the ill-fated letter right on the porch. James had no doubt that someone had made a bad joke since Halloween was only a few hours away. He decided to just burn the envelope. When the man told this story to his wife and children, they were shocked. Family members realized that now death would haunt James. He himself did not believe that fiction had a connection with reality. But soon the hero became convinced that dark forces exist. As the day wore on, James began to feel an unease that he couldn't shake. It was as if something was watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Despite his growing fear, he tried to carry on as normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. As darkness fell, James decided to take a walk to clear his head. As he walked, he heard strange whispers that seemed to be coming from the shadows. He quickened his pace, but the whispers only grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, James stumbled and fell to the ground. He looked up and saw a figure standing over him, dressed in a tattered cloak and holding a scythe. It was Death himself. James tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. Death reached out a bony hand and placed it on James' forehead. James felt a coldness spread through his body, and he knew that he was doomed. In a panic, James tried to run, but Death was always just a step behind him. As James ran through the streets, he saw people staring at him with blank expressions. They were all under Death's spell, and James knew that he was next. Finally, James collapsed in a dark alleyway, unable to run any further. Death loomed over him, his scythe raised high. James closed his eyes and waited for the end. But the end never came. When James opened his eyes, he was lying in his own bed, sweating and shaking with fear. It had all been a nightmare. Or had it? As James sat up and looked around, he noticed that something was different. His room was filled with an eerie green light, and there was a faint whispering in the air. Suddenly, James remembered the letter. He leapt out of bed and raced to the fireplace, where he had burned the envelope. But there was nothing there. The letter had disappeared as if it had never existed. James knew that he had narrowly escaped death. From that day forward, he never laughed off the legends and stories of Halloween. He knew that there were dark forces at work, waiting to claim those who didn't take them seriously. And he knew that he had been lucky to survive. From that night on, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was still after him. He became increasingly paranoid, jumping at every creak and rustle in the night. He even started seeing strange figures out of the corner of his eye, lurking in the shadows. His family grew increasingly concerned, but James refused to talk about what had happened. He didn't want to sound crazy, but he knew that something was wrong. As Halloween approached again the following year, James became even more on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that the letter of death would find its way back to him, no matter how hard he tried to forget about it. On the night of Halloween, James was alone in the house while his family went out trick-or-treating. He tried to distract himself by watching scary movies, but he couldn't focus. Every time he heard a noise outside, his heart raced with fear. As the night wore on, James heard a knock at the door. He hesitated before answering it, his mind racing with possibilities. What if it was death, come to claim him at last? With shaking hands, James opened the door. But instead of death, he saw a young girl standing on his porch, dressed in a ghostly costume. "Trick or treat," the girl exclaimed, holding out a bag for candy. James breathed a sigh of relief and gave the girl a handful of candy. As she turned to leave, James noticed that she was carrying something else, a letter. Without thinking, James snatched the letter from the girl's hand and tore it open. Inside, he saw the same ominous message that had haunted him for the past year: "You have been chosen. Redirect this letter or face the consequences." James felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that he couldn't ignore the letter this time. He had to find someone to pass it on to, no matter the cost. But as he searched for a recipient, James realized that he was running out of time. The shadows seemed to be closing in around him, and he knew that death was not far behind. In a final, desperate move, James tried to burn the letter once more. But this time, the flames refused to take hold. The letter remained intact, mocking him with its ominous words. As the clock struck midnight, James knew that he had failed. Death had finally caught up to him, and there was no escaping his fate. With a final, desperate scream, James was consumed by darkness. The next morning, James' family returned home to find the house in disarray. Every piece of furniture had been overturned, and there were strange markings scrawled across the walls. They searched the house for James, but he was nowhere to be found. The only clue was the charred remains of the letter of death, still lying on the porch where James had tried to burn it. In the years that followed, James' family was haunted by his memory. They could never shake the feeling that he was still out there, lost in the darkness. Some say that on the night of Halloween, if you listen closely, you can hear James' screams echoing through the night. And every year, the legend of Boo lives on, a warning to those who dare to ignore the forces of darkness that lurk in the shadows. That's the end of the story. Thank you for your attention. If you want to listen more, join us on Scary Stories.